hide the case. First, they wanted the public to know about the case. They put all this information in the public, all in newspapers, all these hundreds of witnesses, all these people are coming. They said coming forth, but when it came right down to it, they didn't have nothing but a small pool of people that we had proven had all set a plot up in South Beach, Florida, bounced up into Atlanta, into a house where it was at, and hanging out, and they plotted. They saw we had it. They knew they couldn't sustain the case. Well, and what they didn't do, by the way, also the prosecution, as they call themselves, which is Maxwell Woods and Don Baskins, right? What they did is they called witnesses, but they called about 4 witnesses, right? We called all the rest of their so-called witnesses in the indictment. We put them on the stand. The so-called victims in the indictment, the prosecution never called them. We had to call the so-called victims and put them on the stand, and they had to say in front of the court, he never did nothing to me, I was never molested, and they still want to use those victims' names in their PSI and put as a part of the guilty charge when they got right up in the stand in front of everybody. And that's why the judge closed it down. Anytime we put a witness on the stand that had something to say that was valid, the judge would say, hold it, take the jury out the room, let me hear them privately. And they put Jake's sister up on the stand, and Jake's sister said, I was there, I went to his house, I saw Barbara and all them scheming and plotting this thing together, and I told him I don't want to be no part of it. Jake told me the government's got me on payroll, and if I would work with them, I told them I'm not doing that to my father, so they cursed me out and told me to get out. Right? They knew that every time I stepped in court, I pointed out my jurisdiction rights and how they had no rights over me. My inalienable rights were being blocked. I don't live by their laws or by their government. They knew that was coming. And so what they did is whatever lawyer they threw at me, and they were giving me lawyers that I didn't hire on, like the Garland firm, right, who's there, placed there sole purposely to draw rich black money so that they can give them pleas and mess their careers up. Right? I didn't hire those people. I didn't sign any contracts with those people. I didn't make any verbal agreements with those people. My lawyer was Leroy Johnson, first black senator in Georgia. They pushed him out the way and they jumped on it so they can sabotage this case. The purpose of this case is to establish certain precedents in the state of Georgia. One is this is the first time the feds ever got involved in what they call a sex case. You follow?
Yes.
Second, this is the first time Middle District Georgia got involved with a RICO case. So they were trying to set a precedence with this organization, as they call us the wu-nuwaupu, and avoid now the Yamasee Native American tribal name, so that they can keep it as a religious organization. And this is why the case was all in court based around religious and religious belief and who I say I am and who they believe I to be, so that they can eventually, after this case, set a precedence to go after all of the black ministers in Georgia, like Creflo and all the other prominent black ministers, so they can come after them. Somebody can come out the framework 10 years, 15 years and say he did something to them, he felt them, or he did this thing, get 3 or 4 people to collaborate that was on salary by the government, by the way, because we found out the witnesses were on salary, receiving favorable concessions, which came out in the court. Right? I know I didn't answer your question yet, but I want to get this on point.
Okay.
Receiving favorable concessions, like Jake York was paid by them. We know that to be a fact. And he was sent out to scare other people, to tell other people, we got information on you, and if you don't say this, and you're going to take your kids away, we're going to lock you up, etc., etc., etc. Question. But now that that's on point, right? Why did they close the court? The judge had to close the court because they knew they didn't have the witnesses. They had boasted from day one that they had all these children that had been molested. And they said they're going to put them up there and they can't wait. Because I remember when I was in Atlanta, when Mr. Bright came on with his new indictment, the first thing he said in the newspaper, in Atlanta Constitution Journal, and in News Today, he said, I want to put every child up there because I want every part of this case heard. That was his whole new thing when he came out with all this new indictment. As time went on, they realized that as they called people and interviewed people, that most of the people that they had as victims were saying nothing never happened.
Right.
And that they isolated down to a handful of people who had corrupt records, for instance, money, and put it in this kind of money orders and break it down like this, and everything will go away. We got a bunch of letters from her son admitting to me that he's very sorry, that his mother and them put him up to do this for a lot, for money, and told him how now that they're out of the community they can't survive and they don't know how to do anything, and they need to go, and the community should be paying them, and so they just get money out of the community. So then it was easy for Jake to solicit them and get them in. Then the same thing with the sister was having mental problems all the time, so they tied her in it. So now they got a package of people that he then convinced that this is how we're going to work this. They all lived in the house together. They rehearsed their stories, and they started soliciting other people who was what they call dissidents or disgruntled members who were put out for various reasons. Before this, they planned on having an open court, make a big scene out of it. The judge was smart, so what he said was, I'm going to move this down to a town called Brunswick. So it happened that Brunswick is the same town that the Yamasee Native American Moors had their conflict with the Confederates, and he happens to be, Judge Ashley Royal happens to be a descendant directly of those Confederates. This is no coincidence, right? And he took it down to Brunswick where he practiced law and lived for 20 years. This is no coincidence. He chose the jury himself. I sat there. Every time we would say somebody, he would say no and then pick somebody else. He had already had these people picked. The people outside in the courtroom, because when you have a jury pick, you're sitting in a separate room. Outside in the courtroom, the people were gathered, over 200 people, waiting to be selected. As they were coming in, he would ask them, this is Ashley Royal, right? And we have the minutes of this here. Did you hear about the case? They would say yes. The whole purpose of pulling the jury is because they're not supposed to hear about the case, so they're not biased or prejudiced. They would say yes. Where did you hear about the case? I heard about the case from the Savannah newspaper. I heard about the case from the Brunswick newspaper. I heard about the case on the radio this morning. And did you hear about a guilty plea? Yes, I heard that the man pleaded guilty, so he must be guilty. He still put those people on the jury panel. After they came in and said they were discussing it inside the court before they came in. And this, about out of the 40 or 50 people that he did bring in, everyone said not one person said they never heard nothing about the case, or never heard nothing about the wu-nuwaupu, or never heard nothing about Malachi, New York, or what they called. Every single one of them admitted to having heard something about this case. He still put them on the jury panel, and then he shuffled the jury panel in a way where it looked like there were some blacks up there, which would make it somewhere near a jury of my peers, but by the time it came down, those were what they call the sit-ins, and they were pulled off. And the one black woman who was left up there is the one woman who said this case is a farce, and I know it's going to get overturned, and I don't want to be a part of it. So she resulted in a hung jury, but what he did is he made all the juries anonymous so nobody could find them. So he could pick them and get rid of them so nobody can trace this out. So he set it up like that. So they moved it down there, but he moved his excuse that he'd been monitoring the wu-nuwaupians for years as a